Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third in our RTPI London series, where we're exchanging ideas again around different themes related to planning in London. Particularly given the current crisis, there's a lot of ideas being generated, and we want to make sure that we're capturing them, because actually this could really change how things go in the future. So what we're talking about today is healthy streets and healthier streets, and I think something that's been on everyone's agenda for a long time. It's a cornerstone of the Mayor's transport strategy in 2018. But what we're seeing, and we've seen in a lot of headlines over the past few weeks, is actually this is being accelerated because of the crisis. And so we've got a range of really great panelists today, as ever, who are experts in this field, and we'll go through and we'll hear kind of what they're thinking about in their profession. So today we've got Lucy Saunders, who's a public health specialist, who many of you will know, and was most famously invented, I think, the term healthy streets and the TfL framework, which is the cornerstone of the Mayor's transport strategy. We're joined by Ben Poole, who is an air quality campaigner and architect, campaigning for a range of different organisations, in particular Mums for Lungs, who haven't heard of are a group of mums who want to see better air quality in London. And I think one of the things we've got to remember is a key reason for healthy streets in the first place was about improving air quality and reducing the amount of traffic on the street. And then we're pleased to be joined by Will Bradley from the GLA, who is a policy officer focused on streetscape design and is seeing a lot of the current live projects that the Mayor's being put forward. And then we'll hear from Bruce McVean of the City of London Corporation, who a couple of weeks ago announced that they will be pedestrianising a significant proportion of streets in the city, which obviously is great news. And then we'll open up to some polls and to some Q&A. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Lucy. Hopefully you have got the presentation ready, and I think we will go from there. Thanks. Okay, that's all working.
Okay, so we're talking today about whether the streets-based plan for London in response to the COVID pandemic is going to help to accelerate the delivery of healthy streets. And for those of you who aren't familiar with healthy streets, I thought I'd just give a quick recap of what it is. This is a framework for changing all our decision-making processes around planning and transport to deliver better street environments that address the challenges we have around public health, inequity, and climate change and sustainability. And it's all focused around the human experience and changing the human experience of being on streets. So this is the framework that is in the London Plan and is also the framework for the Mayor's transport strategy. So this is a time of opportunity for us. This is one of the point closures that has recently gone in. This one's in Tower Hamlets. This street previously was a very dangerous street to walk and to cycle on. It was really unpleasant. And through putting a few planters in the carriageway here, they've transformed this street environment and meant that lots of people can now safely walk and cycle around their neighbourhood and get to their local park. So a really positive change that we've seen happen already in London. But a key point that I want us to think about today, and we're going to hear later from Will and from Bruce about what the plans are, is whether what we're putting in place is actually on the scale that is needed to address the needs of Londoners. We've seen in the last couple of weeks, as well as these positive changes like these point closures, a lot of people getting into their cars. And the picture on the left is the queue for the drive-through McDonald's when it opened in Merton a couple of weeks ago, and people sat in a traffic jam for hours and hours on end to go and get some chicken nuggets. And there is a risk with the reduction in public transport provision that we're going to see an increase in car use rather than an increase in walking and cycling. So the scale of change that's needed. This map here, you won't have seen before because it's new. It shows every street in London where the carriageway is wide enough that it could have a 3.2 metre wide carriageway lane for vehicles in each direction, plus a 2.2 metre wide cycle lane on in each direction along that street. This map reminds us of the massive size of Greater London. You can see in darker grey where the current protected cycle infrastructure is in London. And if you're leaning in and really straining to see it, that's partly because there's not a whole lot of it yet. When we're looking at what the plans are that are coming in for responding to the COVID pandemic, where we need hundreds of thousands of people to be cycling to work, we need to see how it compares with the network that's needed across London. And another important thing for us to remember is that it's not just about a pandemic that's happening at the moment. This is the scale of change that we need for all Londoners to be able to get the physical activity they need to stay healthy every day and for people to be able to travel sustainably. So this is a big challenge for us in terms of cycling. But we have the space there. These are the streets where we could put in protected cycle infrastructure. This is a picture of one of the sections of pavement widening that you may have seen popping up around London. They're generally put in front of shops where people are queuing along the pavement, and there's short sections of widened pavements. If we look at the scale of the challenge in London in terms of pavement width, the map here shows in grey all the streets in London where the pavement is not wide enough for 2 people to social distance. And the pink lines show all the streets in London where 2 people could social distance as long as there are no trees, bins, phone boxes, any other kind of clutter on the pavement. The picture on the left is a very familiar view, I would think, for many of you, of a typical London pavement. These are wide enough for able-bodied people to walk in single file. When we're thinking about town centres, when we're thinking about the centre of London, we're going to have more than 2 people trying to pass on any given pavement. So we've got a huge challenge in terms of wider pavements. And you may be thinking, well, social distancing on pavements is going to be around for a few months. Is it worth making the pavements wider for that? But this is a bigger issue that we had already, which is that there are millions of people in this city who need much wider pavement so that they can just physically get around. People who are using mobility impairments, people travelling in groups, lots of people need wider pavements. But we talk a lot about infrastructure, and you'll probably hear from Will and Bruce a lot about infrastructure, and there is so much more to it than infrastructure. So the picture on the left shows the point closure I mentioned earlier. The picture on the right shows it last week. If we don't manage how people use cars and where people park cars, then the things we're doing to try and create space for people to walk and cycle are really undermined by car use. So we have to be managing car use, managing behaviours, and not just thinking about creating the physical space for walking and for cycling. And people aren't always moving. So understandably, transport authorities are thinking about the movement of people on public transport in cars, walking and cycling. But our streets are needed for so much more than that. People do need to sit down. The picture on the left is one of the benches that was taped up so that people wouldn't sit down. There are many people who need to sit, and we all need to take our daily exercise, and people still need to get to the shops. People still need to be able to get to the doctors even during a pandemic. And if we don't physically provide safe places for people to sit down, then we're going to find that some people are excluded from our public spaces. Also, we're being encouraged to socialise outside now as well. So the current rules that are in place are that we're allowed to go out and socialise, but if our streets aren't wide enough for people to be able to do that, if there's nowhere for them to sit down to socialise, then we're going to really struggle to meet that public need as well. So we have to think about streets as being more than just corridors for movement, but also places that need to be pleasant for people to be in. So what is our response to COVID-19 going to be? If it's very short-term infrastructure, the kind of temporary things we've been seeing so far, I think we will struggle to get the public buy-in to making these changes permanent in the longer term. If we think more about the human experience of being on streets, putting in measures that are going to make them more pleasant to be on for people right now, it's more likely we're going to get the public to be supportive of making these changes more permanent and to enable us to deliver the Healthy Streets programme at scale. So my final point is that I would like us really to keep the focus during all this discussion around health and pandemics and emergency measures, on what is the human experience like and how are we making sure that streets are meeting the needs of all people who need to be out walking and cycling and spending time in those street environments. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lucy. And we'll come back to talk about some of these issues in the Q&A later on. If people want to ask specific questions, there's a chat bar, so feel free to send that over and we'll try and get through those when we get into the Q&A. I'm going to pass on now to Ben Poole, who is a campaigner, architect for Mums for Lungs, talking about particularly the issue around air quality, what needs to be done on our streets and around our schools. So Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us to talk at this event. I think it's a really good platform for us to cover some of the things that we've been doing. There's something in the air. It's air pollution. It's an important issue and a human right to breathe clean air. And I think if we can solve it, there are many, many co-benefits. So I'm just going to introduce myself. How did all this start for me? Well, quite a few years ago, just before my son was born, I decided to start cleaning the flat. And I wiped my finger down the wall, and this is what came off it. Similarly, bright, shiny fridge magnets started to look like this. That's actually iron particles that have attracted black carbon when we got them analysed by some friends of ours. So then we placed an air filter in my son's bedroom when he was born, and this was in there for 4 weeks running constantly. So you don't really need facts, figures and reports as an individual to understand what this, the issues there before your eyes. So I started a small local, hyperlocal group called Bloomsbury Air. It's very small, grassroots. We carried out some citizen science monitoring with London colleges. We used Facebook to disseminate information and try and raise awareness. So, and we campaigned to the local councils, GLA, but also did grassroots on the ground idling awareness campaigns and worked with local schools on curriculum-based activities. But the most important thing was we began meeting and forming with other groups, and Mums for Lungs being one of them. So Mums for Lungs is another grassroots organisation that's been going for about 3 years and campaigning about air quality issues across London. But I'm going to focus on the School Streets campaign, which was started in February 2019. Mums for Lungs didn't come up with School Streets, but we picked it up as something that was worth following up on and campaigning on. So what are school streets? Well, they're temporary road closures around schools at pick up and drop off times. They're term time only. Only pedestrians and cyclists are allowed to use the roads at these times. Signs are put up to inform drivers of the closure, and there are barriers and cameras to enforce. Residents, local businesses and so on can apply for exemptions. So this is Bessemer Grange Primary School, and this just gives you an idea of what a school street can be like. It's car-free, it's friendly, it's a happy place. This is why school streets? Well, this is why, and this picture shows all the reasons as to why cars and kids shouldn't really be mixing, especially outside the school gates. So the key things about school streets is, one is that they reduce traffic pollution, so creating a safer environment. They're improving safety around the school. It becomes a less stressful place. They encourage active travel, which improves health and learning outcomes for children. We're looking at an obesity crisis, so if children can be more active before school, that's great. And they raise awareness of air pollution and the need to reduce traffic. So one school street can reach, maybe 1,000 people through the staff and the parents. And it's important to remember that half of the pollution, broadly about half of the pollution generated in London is traffic related. And that 25% of rush hour traffic is the school run. So that might not be in central London, but certainly in the periphery of London it is. So it's important that we start to tackle this. So the campaign researched for the most illegally polluted schools, of which we knew there were 400 from the Mayor's office. And we wrote to 300 head teachers of schools where we thought school streets could be implemented, and we used social media to inform parents. So there was a huge interest, and so Facebook page was set up to coordinate things and for people to contact each other and share information and resources. And since the campaign started, we're not entirely responsible for all the school streets because some of them are going to happen anyway, but it was a good push. We've had 80 to 100 school streets announced. So from October 2018, when 5 boroughs were trialling the scheme, we've got now 25 London boroughs trialling or aiming to trial. So that, as you can assess, there's varying levels of commitment there, and we're helping to encourage those with who are taking baby steps to get them to take bigger steps. So what are the challenges? Well, change of attitudes. There's a little image there that's quite funny, I think, and it's quite a common kind of response, but there's still a lot of resistance to having a street closed, even just for 90 minutes every day during term time. But the majority of residents support the schemes once they see the benefits. The other challenge is not every school is suitable. Some schools are on main roads, and those are the ones that we would like to see other measures introduced. So protected cycle lanes, speed reductions, enforcement and traffic calming, perhaps more crossings, closing the side streets, but also mitigation measures, such as moving school entrances, green screens, air filters, that kind of stuff. But they're challenging. They're going to be a challenge. So what's next? Well, for Mums for Lungs, we want school streets in as many schools as possible, UK-wide, and implement the other measures for the schools on main roads. We'll keep putting parents in touch with each other and spreading the word. And we are putting together school assemblies where we're developing assemblies for schools to present to schools, where we can speak to head teachers and parents and raise awareness about school streets and air pollution in general. So one of the things about school streets is that by engaging people in them, you're raising their awareness of air pollution and the wider issue and the wider context, and perhaps they're going to start thinking more carefully about whether they jump in their car or light the wood-burning stove and what other multitude of sources there are. So what can people do? Well, we say to parents, and any parents watching this, join the School Streets Facebook page for advice on next steps. If you've got expertise, by all means, filter it in. Talk to head teachers, get support from the school. Ask for it via Car Free Day. They've got a link you can click and you get a letter and you can ask for it. Email your councillors and cabinet members. And then another thing was, we think, proactive engagement. So we need to lead people by the hand and show them these things. We found from our experience, banging the drum and telling people off doesn't work. We need to share it and take people on the journey to see the vision of what the streets can be like and what a clean air society looks like. So setting up play streets is a great way of doing that. And you can close any street pretty much with council permission and set up a play street with your local community. So these give children the chance to play freely and safely on their doorstep. And they build community, they get people talking, and they empower kids to see the streets as a different place. And I think once you've seen a play street, you can't help but be lifted by it to see that space being used much more for the public benefit. What can professionals do? Well, this is an interesting one, but because we're talking to experts here, so you well know more about this than we do. But our thoughts are, the Hackney Toolkit is a great resource, so that's already out there and being used and tried and tested. Sustrans, you're probably all familiar with them. They're working with Tower Hamlets on implementing school streets. Proactive engagement, we've already touched on. But I think we felt it's important from our experience, to see that there's collaboration between disciplines within the local authorities and between local authorities. Key to kind of everything we do is talk about air pollution, talk about livable cities, talk about health and mobility. Just keep talking about it because people will pick up on it. But also constantly think about the impacts of our own impacts and that of our projects, if we're architects, designers, planners, whatever, and understand what impacts we have. And that leads on to kind of understanding and scrutinizing things like air quality assessments, construction management plans, transport assessments, from both sides of the fence. They're not tick box exercises, we know that. And then, of course, just challenge the status quo. I mean, the difficulty lies, as John Maynard Keynes said, the difficulty lies not in the new ideas, but escaping from the old ones. So we need to sort of shed that inertia of staying where we are. So that's School Streets. I'm just going to talk very quickly about the AIR team, which is another grassroots organisation, but Mums for Lungs very much part of and in the implementation of. So the AIR team is a group of parents and teaching campaigners on a mission to clean up Britain's air. So what we do is come together for moments of big action that everyone can join, and it's about making air pollution a mainstream issue. So we use inventive ideas to generate media attention in political space. And this gets a little bit of funding, so we are able to employ people to help us with that. So we did the mega play street in Great Ormond Street Hospital. So if you can, the example being, it was a great opportunity for patients at Great Ormond Street, children to come out and play with children from the local school. And if you can close a street that's normally used for ambulances and reroute them, then you can close any street really. We did the ULEZ Welcome March. This was to welcome in the ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone, and we had a gateway and we were handing out air pollution busting plants to everybody, and that got quite a lot of media attention, which was lovely. We've done a street sign takeover where we replaced some of the letters on the name of the road with chemical symbols for air pollution. So as you can see, you've got Stoke Newington, Church Street and Euston Road being replaced with an O2. We carried out a bus stop action where oxygen masks dropped down from bus stops when air pollution got to a high level. And we had children dress up as air hosts and air hostesses handing out flyers and leaflets about what you can do about it. And then most recently, we did Breathe GB, which was a website. We did some studies into training grounds across the country and the levels of air pollution at those training grounds and the impact that might be having on our future sporting heroes. We know that if you grow up in an area of high pollution, the evidence suggests that it reduces your lung capacity by up to 14%. So what if Team GB was 14% better because their lungs were cleaner? So that was that idea. And just to conclude and to kind of wrap this up, this is now, here we are now, or last week in Piccadilly. And what's the future? We've just seen a glimpse of something that's different. We've heard the birds, we've breathed the clean air, and we've walked down the middle of Piccadilly, as you can see. But we're recovering from this pandemic and we're going to need to rebuild. So what do we want? We want healthier, happier, more equitable cities. These are necessary and they're within reach. The pandemics demonstrate we're capable of cooperation on a scale that few of us really thought was possible to start with. So we need to be building back better, working together, fostering solidarity, and think of child-friendly planning as family-friendly planning. So it really comes back to, I think, in many, many cases, to children and our children in the future. We have a responsibility to, I believe, to leave this planet in a better state than we found it, and be embarrassed and heartbroken if we can't achieve that. One more slide. So just a thought to finish on. If you parked all the vehicles in Greater London together, if you bumper to bumper, you would fill all the Royal Parks and Hampstead Heath. So how about we flip that the other way around? Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you, Ben. And I think that's really demonstrating the power that actually the citizens have in all of this. But moving on now to more of an authority perspective, we're going to hear from Will and then Bruce. So Will from GLA, and then we'll hear from Bruce talking about what the City of London are doing. We've got a few questions coming in, which we'll try and pick up in the Q&A. So keep them coming, and then I'll just pass on to Will.
Thanks very much, everyone, and thanks to those two speakers who've just told us what needs to happen. Hopefully, I'm going to set out how we're responding at the London-wide level to try and make some of this happening. So I work at the Greater London Authority in a team working with the Deputy Mayor for Transport and the Walking and Cycling Commissioner. And we have spent the last couple of weeks working on a plan that responds to precisely the question that's kind of being posed today, which is, will this crisis accelerate our move towards more active transport, or will it push us backwards? And the Mayor is really leading from the front here. He is absolutely determined that our response to the crisis does accelerate this shift in a positive way. And we've developed a plan, our Street Space for London plan, which we hope will make this happen. If we can deliver everything that we're setting out to deliver, we should be able to avoid a car-based recovery, but we don't have long. You know, we're talking weeks and months. As other people have said, something that we've really experienced in the last couple of weeks is a massive drop in traffic in our roads. And for those people who've been able to kind of get out and about, the silver lining has been people feeling confident to use our streets in a different way that they normally would do. You know, families and kids going out for their daily exercise on bikes, or key workers cycling to work who are trying to avoid public transport. This is a street in central London. It's usually full of taxis, of delivery vans. It's just behind the Treasury, and you know, it looks like a Dutch street at the moment because you know, it's full of people out and about on their bikes, not in any special kit, and it's kind of really become very apparent that it's the traffic that has been kind of stopping Londoners get out more. There's this on their bikes. There's this huge kind of pent-up demand that we've suddenly seen has been released. There's not just queues outside of supermarkets. There's queues outside of bike shops. We're hearing from colleagues across the industry that they just cannot keep up with demand. And you know, colleagues at City Hall who hadn't considered cycling before are trying to buy bikes. They're being told that there's no bikes until August. You know, it's amazing to see, you know, already some of this change is happening. But we have also seen traffic levels start to creep up a little again, and particularly in China, we've seen a huge spike in car use following the easing of lockdown restrictions. And this slide just kind of sets out the key challenge that we're going to have. On the left is our kind of typical demand on public transport before the crisis. And then you can see that with social distancing, if all those journeys were going to be made, we are nowhere near able to move the amount of people that we will need to move in London in the way that they used to move around. You know, the number of people that a tube or a bus might be able to carry with social distancing is possibly about 15%. So millions of more journeys are going to have to be made in other ways. And as we know, if those journeys are going to be made by walking or by cycling, our streets cannot go back to the way that they were before, because we know that those streets without you know, main roads without protection for cyclists, or residential roads with too much traffic, are just not acceptable and comfortable for most people to use. So we have rapidly developed our street space plan to enable millions more journeys to be made by walking and cycling. And the aim is to rapidly repurpose our streets, focused on 3 key areas. The first of which is creating more space in our town centres and our transport hubs. We're going to need, as Lucy's talked about, wider footways on high streets to enable shops to start opening again and for people to get safely to and from them. And this is something, it's kind of been the thing that we've seen most of so far, with kind of pavement widening and suspension of parking outside of shops. So this is an example in Brixton, a kind of typical busy main road, lots of space for cars, not so much space for people. And overnight, a couple of weeks ago, we took out a lane of traffic and extended the pavement in front of the bus stop to give people waiting for the bus space to do that safely. And it was a pretty amazing response. I think it's pretty clear from the way that this was kind of chalked up overnight that people like this. And you'll see kind of more and more of this being rolled out over the next few weeks. This is a bus stop in Camden, just outside Sainsbury's, where again, we've taken what was a lane for general traffic and we've extended the footway to give more space for people walking and for people waiting for the bus. I think the latest figure, we've already created about 11,000 square meters of new pavement space just in a couple of weeks. So, you know, to Lucy's point, the challenge is enormous, but there is a kind of a real energy and drive to respond to this at the moment within TfL and across most of the boroughs. This is Broadway Market in Hackney, another, you know, a local high street that has been closed to traffic using emergency powers. This was not uncommon on that high street. There was lots of parking, there was lots of vehicles, often driving and parking on the pavement, making it a very unpleasant place, given the numbers of people that shop and spend time here. And that closure now means that there is more space for people to safely visit their shops when they start opening again. Our second kind of key area of focus for the plan is strategic cycling routes. You know, Lucy showed that map of how many streets for London, how many streets there are that have space for segregated cycling. This is my boss on a new lane that we created on Park Lane. And this is a street that, you know, 2 months ago, as others that have worked with TfL will attest to, we wouldn't have dreamed of even drawing up plans to kind of reallocate space. You know, there was a within TfL, with it, for those people that kind of manage the traffic, this road was quite sacrosanct. It was the in ring road, and we can't possibly kind of reduce traffic capacity. But sort of over the last 2 weeks, we have taken out traffic lanes and we've created a bi-directional cycle track and a bus lane, just leaving a single traffic lane. So this is like a really good example of how we can kind of re-democratize our space. And you know, it's nothing has really changed here, as we're kind of saying. You know, this has been our strategy all along, to kind of reduce space for private cars and create more space for walking, cycling, and public transport. But the speed at which we now need to do it, and the speed at which TfL is moving, is quite remarkable. Euston Road is following soon with cycle tracks, and we're also going to be upgrading kind of existing routes down in South London on the old unsegregated cycle superhighways. And we've also got a quite a big program in central London looking at removing general traffic from a lot of streets. This is Hammersmith Gyratory. We've been working with the council here for as long as I've been in the job, actually, and we were never able to start work before the crisis, and overnight the council has created a pop-up cycle lane here. This is not a particularly usable slide, I'm afraid, but just kind of shows where our thinking currently is in terms of our kind of key strategic cycle routes. You'll see the changes in central London, which I've got on the next slide, but it's taking all the work that we had been planning before the crisis. We're accelerating all of that work, and we're also looking at where we need new connections, particularly looking at where we need to try and take people off public transport. So we're kind of looking at underground lines, for example. You know, the central line is a kind of a key one where we know we need a safe cycling route to enable people to not have to use the central line, given the capacity of that line is going to be so much lower with social distancing. This is our current plan for central London. Bruce will be able to talk a little bit more about this, but we designed these changes to kind of complement what is happening in the city, and to be thinking about how we shift some of those transport patterns in central London. So people who might have previously got a train into Waterloo and then jumped on the Waterloo City line or the Northern line to get to their office, we are going to need those people to complete those journeys in other ways. So we're going to be changing how our streets work to enable that to happen. So we're looking at Waterloo and London Bridge to stop traffic from those two bridges. We're looking at the Old Street Clerkenwell Road corridor to make that bus and bike only, to free up space for people to cycle. We're looking at Bishopsgate, so Shoreditch High Street down to London Bridge, at kind of radically reducing traffic there. The third area of focus is low traffic neighbourhoods. So this is the leader of Hounslow Council, who is proudly standing in front of what I think is the biggest planter I've ever seen. And we're kind of really, we're seeing quite a lot of this around London. We want to work with every London borough to create low traffic neighbourhoods. An approach which has kind of recently been pioneered in Waltham Forest through our Mini Holland programme. And you can see here, you know, it's a very cheap and relatively simple, although politically complex way to kind of change how our streets work. With a few bollards and a few planters, you can make streets access only, so everyone can still drive to their house if they need to. You can still get deliveries, but it means that roads, residential streets are no longer full of through traffic that doesn't need to be there. This is a scheme from Lambeth. This is one that they had been planning for some time, but using emergency powers, they are bringing this forward. And this was, I think, last night. The teams were out kind of putting up the signs which are going to come into place at the start of next week to kind of reduce traffic in that area of Oval and enable people to walk and cycle more. Similarly, this is Hackney, a picture from, I think these filters went in last night. So Hackney are kind of working on a kind of a borough-wide plan, but they're also finding changes that they can make from their existing programme very quickly. So this is just to kind of make the point that, you know, the scale of the change is huge, but change is already happening in some boroughs at quite a fast rate. I think Camden put in 5 new modal filters just last week. So yeah, things are really changing already. And then finally, kind of as part of our strategy for kind of low traffic neighbourhoods, coming back to what Mums for Lungs are calling for, is school streets. The mayor is calling on all schools to consider school streets, and this is, you know, quite a change in emphasis. You know, TfL and the mayor have kind of been pushing school streets for a while, but in a kind of softly approach, and you know, kind of only working with schools that are already kind of really keen for it. But we recognise that this is such an important topic to get right, particularly with, you know, as parents might be a bit worried about their kids coming back to school. How do we enable that to happen safely? So there's new guidance that has gone out for schools, and we're already seeing, you know, some boroughs who are looking, you know, incredibly ambitiously, you know, maybe 4/5 of their schools will be school streets within a few months. So just a few thoughts to conclude. As I said, you know, whilst everything has changed, nothing has changed. Our transport strategy has been aiming to get more people walking, cycling, using public transport, but what we were looking to achieve over 20 years, we now need to try and achieve over a number of months. We're doing things much faster than has kind of ever been done before in certainly the time that I've been working this area, and I think Bruce and Lucy, who have both got experience working with TfL, will attest to this. You know, the Park Lane scheme might have taken 2 years to plan and consult on, and then another 2 years to build, and that's been put in place in a matter of weeks. So the pace of change is astounding, really. We still, you know, the difficulties of these changes are still there. It still takes political will to do this. The changes are still controversial. You know, you're probably following some of the political fallout from the changes to the congestion charge. But on the other hand, we're seeing boroughs that have been not necessarily politically aligned with the mayor on streets, proposing some pretty good stuff, like in Westminster, and I think it helps that this is coming both from the mayor, but it's also coming from the Conservative government. So we may well live to see less traffic on Oxford Street, for example. Yeah, and I'll leave it there. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Will. One question we've had in, we're having some pretty good questions that we'll come on to after Bruce has spoken. But one question is, are all those schemes permanent, or are they temporary?
So they're going in as temporary measures, and they will be using temporary and emergency traffic orders. But we will, over time, be kind of assessing whether or not we make them permanent. And I think, you know, there is a you know, we're perfectly willing to take stuff out that doesn't work, but stuff that does work and that people like, and that we can then, you know, go through a more permanent consultation process on. You know, we will definitely be looking at kind of embedding some of these changes permanently. Great,
thank you very much. Okay, on to Bruce, who'll talk a bit more. We had a little bit about what's going on in Central London, but we'll talk a bit more specifically about the City of London corporation work.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'll try and be brief. I think there's only so many presentations you can have saying we're putting up loads of barriers to give more space to people walking and cycling, as exciting as the current moment is. So, hi everybody, I'm Bruce McLean. I manage the transportation team at the City of London. We decide what change needs to happen on our streets, and then make that change happen. So, as I said, incredibly exciting times at the moment. And just as with the Mayor's transport strategy, we're kind of delivering a 25-year strategy, which was only adopted last year, essentially over a couple of months, albeit, as you just pointed out, on a temporary basis to start with. I thought just to start with, I would just kind of touch on the scale of the opportunity we have here, not so much in terms of length of street that we might be able to change to, but what might happen to traffic. And you know, has already been said, and I think everybody knows, one of the biggest barriers, or one of the biggest issues to address when healthy streets is how many vehicles are on our streets. And over the last 20 years or so, we've seen traffic reduce in the City of London by 50%, and we have an aspiration to achieve that same level of reduction again over the next 25 years. And what's interesting is what's driven that decrease is the big policy decisions. So the congestion charge coming in had a huge impact, and I'm sure that some of the changes that have been brought in now will have similar impacts in terms of reducing traffic outside of current congestion charge hours. We've also seen that policy decisions like the ones we're all taking now to reduce capacity for motor vehicles have a big impact as well. So when the cycle superhighway went in on upper and lower Thames streets through the city, we saw a big reduction in traffic because lots of people decide not to drive because it's less convenient and the journeys take longer. But I guess what's interesting as well is we've also seen that things that were definitely not policy decisions, or I hope weren't someone's policy, like the 2008 recession, also led to a really significant reduction in traffic. So 16.5% reduction in the number of motor vehicles in the City of London during the working day as a result, occurred at the same time as that recession. So we can assume that they're linked in some way. The city recovered, the economy recovered, grew very significantly in terms of the numbers of workers we accommodated, but we didn't get a rebound in the traffic coming back. So, you know, if anybody is doubting the level of opportunity we have here, just kind of keep those things in mind. And we have a target to reduce motor vehicles in the city by 25% by 2030. And what's happening now is potentially an opportunity to get that level of reduction and secure that for the long term. So yeah, don't doubt the opportunity. Just briefly in terms of what we're planning, we're aiming through our street space programme to support the recovery of the city by making sure that people who live in the city, work in the city, visit the city, are safe and comfortable when they're on our streets. And I think that comfort point is really important. Back to the point that it's just about safety, about giving people space so that they enjoy walking and spending time on our streets. And that was, of course, as a business district, supporting our businesses to get back to work and to reassure them that we're doing everything we can to make sure that when their employees are on our streets, they are safe. Two main areas of activity for that. The big one, and the one that we're here to talk about today, is making changes on streets, provide more space for walking and cycling, and to facilitate queuing and to prioritise as much as we can buses as well. And then, of course, a whole range of supporting measures to help businesses, and I think, you know, secure some of those changes in the way that people operate and do business that can help us secure that longer term reduction in traffic. So, for example, we're putting together guidance for all the types of businesses, tells them what they can do to reduce the number of deliveries they get during the day, the number of delivery vehicles on our streets, and to move as many of those deliveries as possible out of the working day. So that's something to support the temporary change we're making now, but we'll also hopefully secure a longer term change as well. In terms of on-street measures, we're looking at everything that I suppose Will has just outlined. So some streets will close to vehicles at certain times of the day, give priority to people walking, mostly 7 AM to 7 PM. On some streets, we'll be looking to close them at certain points to through traffic, or to change their way they operate, so switching them to one-way working. And that then also allows us to reallocate what was carriageway space to space for walking and cycling as well. And in many instances, those things will be delivered in conjunction and together with each other. The approach we've taken is route-based, so it's less about localised intervention, but it's more about kind of thinking where are the key destinations in the city that people are walking between, and it's mostly walking. 90%, well, pre-COVID, and I'm sure it'll be the same if not more afterwards, 90% of on-street journeys started or finished in the square mile walked. Definitely for us, first and foremost, about providing that space to make walking safe and comfortable. So how can we link up those destinations, and where on those routes do we have pavements that are less than 3 meters wide that we might need to reallocate space to accommodate that? So that's the starting point for it. The first phases of delivery are very much focused, I guess, on that movement. So how do we help people walk around, cycle around, and get around the city? And as I said, it's route-based. So in total, it adds up to 10 kilometres of streets that we'll be delivering change on in one way or another as part of those first phases. I'd say we do in our overall approach and our plan, just in the final processes of the city, we do essentially have have an idea of what we want to do on every street in the city, which is one of the luxuries of only having to plan for a square mile, I guess, and get that. Later phases are going to look at opportunities for things like seating and how we can bring some of those additional measures that we talked about at the start to make our streets more enjoyable places to be, as well as just places around. And that includes as well as we upgrade from very temporary measures as plastic barriers to the more semi-permanent infrastructure as well. And again, as Will has already alluded to, we're very much adopting the approach of deliver fast, accept that we're going to make some mistakes and adapt as necessary. But I think the important thing is that adaptation can go both ways. So I think a lot of people, when they hear you say, we'll deliver fast and make change, assume that you'll just be taking stuff out because it didn't work. But it might be that in certain places we go beyond what we're proposing now. It turns out we need to give more space or people aren't adhering to the change that needs to do, so we might need more closures of streets, for example. And we'll be doing lots of monitoring and consultation, both to inform that quick adaptation that needs to happen, but also to gather feedback and help us decide which of these changes we might want to make permanent in due course. So the first changes for us will start to go in next week, and we hope to have that core network of 10 kilometres of streets fully in place by the middle of July, and if not earlier. And then we'll then go through that process of upgrading light infrastructure and bringing in quality as well as quantity for it. And then just a few points to finish on. Yes, this is temporary, but it is all in line with our longer term transport strategy, and if appropriate, we'll be looking to make things permanent. I think one of the points there is it might not be the case that everything that goes in now, whether it's or elsewhere in London, is instantly kind of made permanent as soon as we kind of recover from COVID and decide it's not necessary as a kind of emergency response. But even if some things end up getting taken out, I think what this will do is accelerate that permanent change on our streets. So we might take something out initially, but I think we'll be back in a year or so to then deliver that permanent change once the processes have been through processes for it. And again, I guess just to finish on as well, Will's already made this point, but I think one of the big legacies is going to come out of this is the way of working. And for a long time, myself and others have talked about this need for us to move quickly, to experiment, and then to make change permanent, and that has happened in some places. But I think this is really going to cement that as a way of thinking about how we make changes on those streets. So right now we're using emergency temporary measures to get this change in there, but there are experimental traffic orders which we've already started to use in places like Bank and on Beach Street, and I think that's the approach to really kind of learn to adopt as a way to go forward. So experiment live, get feedback live, to understand impacts live, and then make that change permanent rather than consulting on a theoretical idea and then trying to persuade people that it's a great thing to do when all they can kind of imagine in their minds is some of the negative things for it without seeing and experiencing the benefits. Thank you.
Great, that's wonderful. Thanks to all the panelists. We've probably got 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes just to answer some questions and to try and get a bit of audience interaction. One thing we wanted to do is just get some polling going. So I'll start the first poll, and then I'll ask one of the questions that's coming through, and I think I'll start with Lucy. So the first poll for the audience is: do you think, based on what you've heard, the COVID crisis will lead to healthier streets in the capital for the long term? So if you want to vote there. And I think a lot of the stuff that's been coming through in terms of the questions has been really focused on, we've clearly focused a lot on inner London, but is the same going to be true for outer London? And actually some people remarked specifically about what's going on south of the river once you get out of zone 3 and 4. You know, is the same applying? Because that's where a lot of the car traffic Lucy, did you want to pick up on that, please?
Yeah, so the sense that I get at the moment from talking to folks who are in the outer boroughs is that there is less ambition and maybe less of an understanding of the hundreds of thousands of people who are now going to need to think about how they get to work not using public transport, and that they're going to need to, probably a lot of them, take up cycling. I think we are seeing more infrastructure in the inner London boroughs that we would expect to see it in, the ones who were already keen to do this kind of stuff, who were already really embracing healthy streets as a framework. And there is a risk of this kind of polarising further the existing situation, where we see people who live in outer London really feeling like they don't have a lot of options, and that their streets are becoming more motor vehicle dominated, rather than realising some of that potential to get healthier.
Great. Okay, I'll just share the results. So the vast majority of our audience are confident that it will lead to a change. Will, do you want to pick up on that? I mean, again, I think a lot of the proposals are very much about kind of like radial links into central London. Should there be more being done around, I guess, some of the centres in outer London?
And you know, there are lots of outer London boroughs who were already committed to this agenda and are already moving really fast. So, and you know, Enfield and Kingston and Waltham Forest were kind of 3 outer London boroughs who have had mini Holland funding from TfL for the last 6 or so years. They have like really accelerated changes to their streets and are already moving fast. So Enfield, for example, have already built another couple of kilometres of protected space on pretty kind of nasty outer London roads. You can almost cycle to the M25 on cycle tracks in Enfield now. Richmond are starting to make some pretty good changes. Hounslow are a really committed borough who have, you know, one of the slides I showed was a new filter that had gone in Hounslow. So, you know, it's just as in inner London, where we have some boroughs and central London who are not committed to this, not naming any names, but you know, it again comes down to the political will to do it. And if the political will is there, changes will happen. If the political will is not there, changes won't happen. Yeah,
great. And a question for Ben. So I mean, a lot of some of the talk coming through in terms of the school streets. I mean, I think everyone, you know, in the profession is probably behind it. It kind of means well. But do you find that, you know, as someone who's coming from a citizen's perspective, you get pushback from other members of the community? I mean, that's certainly something which is kind of coming through in some of the comments, and I think it's true in the area that I live, where we've tried to do a bit more about air quality.
Yeah, you do. You definitely get pushback, and it's fair enough. I mean, you know, these measures shouldn't just be willy-nilly inserted without consultation, without buy-in. I think the thing is that the majority of the school streets that we've seen in the responses, the overwhelming majority, once they've been installed and they see how they work, they're generally really supportive. I think there's sort of a gut, there's a sort of an instant reaction. It's like, oh, I can't drive down that street anymore. Well, it's not true. It's only closed for 90 minutes of the day. And if you are a blue badge holder, for instance, or you're an ambulance or a fire engine, you can still get through if you need to. It's so important. Emergency services can still operate. The road is closed for like 90 minutes every day, and only in term time. So it's not a massive thing, but it makes an enormous difference to those children going to school. They're not standing next to the tailpipe of a 4x4 or whatever. And the streets are that much safer. It's less stressful. It's encouraging children to buy into this, and they're the future, and we want them to be walking and cycling to school, not getting the car to school.
Great, thank you. Bruce, in terms of the proposals the City of London are putting forward, are you expecting pushback, particularly from the business community lobby, or are people generally supportive?
Generally, I think people will be supportive. We've not been getting any pushback really so far. I think there are understandable and legitimate questions from businesses about how they'll get deliveries, those kinds of things. And as I said, we're putting together a kind of package of guidance to help people make those adjustments. But generally, as I said, this is in line with our long-term transport strategy, which has been supported by businesses. And I think businesses know that their workers want safe streets and healthy streets, attractive public spaces around their offices. So this is kind of in line with what we're planning to do anyway. So no, I don't think we'll get a huge amount of pushback on it. I think there will be some points of detail, some adjustments around to either make their own adjustments or for us to adjust around those needs. But generally, this is what businesses are asking for. And the conversations we're having them are less concerned about what we're planning and more just that very understandable question about when and how they'll be able to use public transport again. Because the City of London, we will have more people cycling in particular to the city after this, I don't doubt that. But we will continue to see the foreseeable future of public transport connected place. And so until we get up those capacity levels back up, then I think that's the big concern for business, rather than what we're trying to do locally. I think they're largely very supportive.
Okay, thanks. I'll just do another quick one because I think there's something just to be asked about in terms of how we kind of get people to change behaviour. So for the audience, it'd be interesting to know whether you're more likely to use any of the following modes of transport. So I'll just get that going. And then again, look from a public health perspective, I mean, are there specific ways that we can get people to kind of change their behaviour and stop driving? Again, that's probably particularly in outer London.
I think this is a really important point for us to spend a moment on, because there's a big focus on infrastructure, but in addition to that, people are going to need a huge amount of support if they're thinking of switching from public transport or car to cycling. If they haven't previously been cycling, they might want some support on travel planning, on route finding, on cycling skills in urban areas, on getting a bike, maintaining a bike. So the boroughs, in addition to planning out all of these routes around the city and creating the space for walking and cycling, they're also needing to provide a whole load of other support to enable people to take up cycling as well.
Yeah, and just, it's some of those softer sides. So it's training, it's like, does my office have a shower if I'm cycling on a hot day? Those kinds of things, which are not hard to overcome, but are the genuine concerns that people have when they start taking up cycling. And yeah, but there's definitely a bit of an issue with, an enormous drop in the funding available at TfL as a result of the massive reduction in revenue coming for public transport, means that we have very little money to do all of this, and we need to kind of make the streets safer before we can then encourage people out to come and try them. So it's a difficult one to get the balance right of.
And I think interesting, this might put you off there, but the poll results are showing that actually 45% of our audience are much more likely to kind of start cycling. I mean, I guess that will be the interesting thing to see, and I guess it's where the infrastructure is required. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. It would have been good to have a much longer debate, because I think it's probably one of the most interesting kind of points around that's coming out of this COVID crisis, and something which is certainly changing the face of the capital as we go through, and hopefully for positive. So I'd really like to thank you all for attending. Hopefully, we might be able to do this again face to face in the not too distant future, and actually kind of take stock on whether things will have permanently changed. Thanks to the audience for asking questions. We'll circulate around the panelists and see if we can get a response to each of them. This presentation will be up online. I think we've got a YouTube channel, so we'll share that with panelists. So thanks again. We're hosting these events now every nightly Friday lunchtime. So there's another ideas exchange coming up in 2 weeks on community engagement and what's happening in light of the pandemic. We're also kind of going to be doing events around inclusive economies and high streets. We've also got a good careers event coming up, so that so watch out for those, as well as our regular podcasts, which are going to be coming on Wednesday. So we're trying to do as much as we can to keep the events coming through the crisis. Thanks to the 100 or so people who tuned in for today, realising it's quite nice outside. Hopefully some of you were outside, because I think that's probably the best thing about these events. And just thank you all for your time and your attention. Okay, see you next time.